What's up guys, I hope you're all well. Welcome back to yet another video on the channel and yet another Alton Towers video on the channel. I know I said last week I hadn't really talked about Alton Towers, and it is true. I don't really talk about it enough on this channel, so we're doing another one. And as you guys will have known if you saw last week's video, if you haven't already, don't worry, I'll have it linked in the playlist at the end of this video. But I did kind of throw the hat in the ring and ask you guys whether or not you wanted to see a Secret Weapon 9 video. And some of you replied saying you did want to see it, so here we are. We're here talking about SW9. Now, if you guys don't really know what SW9 is, which is kind of understandable if some of you are kind of new to this sort of thing, it basically stands for Secret Weapon 9, and that is the code name that Alton Towers have used since Nemesis was built. We started with SW3 because there were 2 iterations before the original Nemesis, and then since then we've carried on through the secret weapons right up to the most recent secret weapon, which was of course Secret Weapon 8, Wicker Man. Now, it's been 9 years since Wicker Man's construction fences first went up. I saw Theme Park Worldwide's Instagram post yesterday while I was at Legoland, and it really hit me how long it's been since those construction fences went up for Wicker Man. And yeah, it kind of got my cogs turning about what we could potentially see next. So in today's video, I'm going to give you my top 3 coaster types that I would really like to see at Alton Towers, alongside where they could go, what the themes could be, and just overall how excited I am for this next project and what's realistic and what isn't. Okay then, so hopefully you guys enjoy. Let's get into the video. Okay then, so the first roller coaster type on my list is going to be the Mack Striker. Now this is pretty topical at the moment, plainly because of course we had the opening of Voltron very recently, which is the Mack Striker model, and it's a very new model of roller coaster. But Voltron has been a massive smash hit success. You know, I'm absolutely gutted I haven't been able to get out there and ride it yet. It does look absolutely incredible. It just goes to show the powerhouse that Mack Rides truly is. Now, of course, Voltron isn't the only thing we've kind of had that's going to be integral to why I think this could be likely, because we also recently got Hyperia. Now, those of you that don't know, Hyperia is also manufactured by Mack Rides and is a hypercoaster. So they're very different roller coaster types, but they are the same manufacturer. And hopefully now that Merlin have kind of seen that they're very capable, you know, of creating something that's going to be very successful for their parks, and in addition to that, seeing how successful, you know, Voltron's been over at Europa Park, I think it's going to make a pretty good case for them to kind of want to hire Mack Rides again for another roller coaster. Now, what makes the Mack Striker kind of a really, you know, exciting prospect is because it's got a very interesting layout. It's very versatile and compact. You know, Voltron doesn't really take up a lot of space if you look at a lot of the videos from Europa Park, so it would be an ideal thing for a park much like Alton Towers that's very restricted by space and planning permission to maybe invest in, and it is just as thrilling as any other coaster. The only downside being there isn't really a world's first or a UK's first kind of selling point for this. But nevertheless, it would be an absolutely awesome coaster. Now, as far as where this could potentially be located, like I said, it takes up a very small footprint. My first kind of thought would be to go down the Dark Forest route, either a replacement for Rita, if they're going to remove a coaster for SW9, either that, or maybe they could potentially eat into some of the gardens that's just outside the back of 13. This is obviously not an ideal thing because it is a conservation area and it's a real ball ache when it comes to the planning permission. But I think there's plenty of space for it there, and like I said, it doesn't need to necessarily have a massive footprint. Definitely not as large as Hyperia's is over at Thorpe Park. This is kind of a very odd roller coaster, and as we've seen with a lot of Voltron's theming, you know, it's themed to very Victorian and very old school buildings and style, and for some reason I just can't get that out of my head, so I really do see this coaster working well in the Dark Forest or themed around something kind of spooky, because it has got that really intense kind of compact layout that would kind of weave through trees in my mind. Like, I can imagine a Mack Striker weaving through a forest and it being a really thrilling experience. So I think, you know, with Alton Towers not really being able to go over the tree line, you can have these really nice bursts of speed up into a small launch, and yeah, it just kind of works as being a very small yet packing a massive punch kind of coaster, which I think is what Alton Towers really needs. Okay then, so getting a little bit more exciting now. The next coaster I'm going to talk about is an Intamin vertical launch coaster. This really excites me because, again, this is one of the things that, you know, a Mack Striker doesn't really have that this would have, and that is the kind of world record pull or marketability, or UK's first marketability that Merlin absolutely seem to love, because a vertical launch is something we haven't seen in the UK or really that much in Europe. You know, we've got plenty of launch coasters, especially in the UK with Rita, Stealth, Icon. You know, we've got a load of you know, launch coasters. We're definitely not running low on them, but a vertical launch coaster, now that's something very interesting. Now when you kind of initially hear this, it's kind of a bit concerning, because Alton Towers famously can't build above the tree line. That's why things like Nemesis, you know, and Oblivion are kind of built down in ditches. And yeah, that would easily be the solution for this. I don't think it necessarily means that this is a complete write-off. Even though a vertical launch probably would need a fair bit of height, they don't actually need to build from ground level. They can go kind of down, and maybe it shoots up out of the ground. Very similar to, you know, Oblivion, in the sense that most of the roller coaster is kind of hidden, which I really like about Oblivion. And on the topic of that, that is exactly where I think a ride like this would fit the most. Now, of course, X Sector is something we've had additions to fairly recently in the kind of big grand scheme of things. Of course, the Smiler was SW7 just before Wicker Man was, so it's certainly not in dire need of a new attraction. However, the main thing that's compelling me, you know, drawing me to X Sector on this is the fact that it's a very similar kind of ride to Oblivion. Now, I don't mean that in the sense that they're exactly the same ride type, because they're pretty much polar opposite. One drops you down and one shoots you up. But that's exactly my point. I could easily see this kind of acting as a sequel to Oblivion. Maybe we could see, you know, this is the experiment to get people out of the void that Oblivion sent them in. Maybe this is a rescue mission, and the end of the coaster is you shooting up in the air, out of the ground, and back to safety. That is a prospect that really excites me, and I love it when Merlin really go kind of balls to the walls with their theming and storyline. It works tremendously well with Wicker Man, and even, you know, more successfully with the Smiler, and I would love to see it being implemented with SW9. That's the only kind of thing that I didn't really like about Hyperia. They could have, you know, done a lot more of the story side of things, but I was just happy to have a new roller coaster at Thorpe Park, much as I'm sure everyone else was as well. But yeah, in terms of location, I do think X Sector, there's, again, you could cut into some of the, you know, woodland area at the back, and that is kind of less problematic than something like cutting into the gardens would be, because the gardens is a very protected area of Alton Towers within the protective area, if that makes sense. So that wouldn't be as bad. They could kind of put it down, you know, towards the bottom behind Oblivion. Maybe they could make a footpath going underneath Oblivion's brake run and then leading out into this new coaster plaza. Alternatively, they could get rid of Spinball Whizzer and kind of maybe cat-handedly expand X Sector out that way. But I do think if they want to keep it very much enclosed with X Sector, and especially, you know, in my imaginary world, if it is a sequel to Oblivion, then I think that spot behind Oblivion is the perfect place. Okay then, so moving on into the final roller coaster, and the one personally I would love the most, but I do think is a real growing success story in the theme park industry, and that is a dueling coaster. Now, other than the fact of the just rule of cool with these coasters, they are a really cool looking roller coaster off-ride, or roller coasters as a dueling coaster would normally be labelled as. And yeah, recently we have actually seen a dueling coaster within the UK. Of course, I literally rode it yesterday at the time of recording this video. We have Minifigure Speedway over at Legoland Windsor. That is an absolutely incredible coaster, and even though it is a bit smaller and it's on the family scale side, it still packs a punch, and it's still a very enjoyable ride. You know, the backward section's amazing. The initial kind of launch where you're dropped from the top and kind of fired out over the kind of hill. It's an absolutely fantastic coaster experience, and I do think anyone who hasn't ridden it, I really urge you to, if you ever go to Legoland. It is well worth, you know, giving a go. And I do think that is kind of the main reason, especially fresh off the back of coming off of it yesterday, that this is at my #1 on the list, because that's a very small scale dueling coaster. We've of course recently also this year seen the opening of one on a bit of a larger scale, which was of course Stardust Racers over at Universal Epic Universe, and that went down an absolute treat. So I think Merlin could easily set their eyes on this. I think it's a very viable option. The only thing is, it wouldn't necessarily be a UK's first. It would not be labelled as the UK's first dueling coaster. But knowing Merlin, they'll find some way of marketing it as that way. You know, as we saw with Wicker Man certainly wasn't the first wooden coaster in the UK. In fact, it's far from it. But they still managed to kind of find a way to market that as being the UK's first, with of course the fire effects mixed with the woods. You know, that was a massive success for them. So I do think they can find success outside of the coaster type itself being the world's first or the UK's first. So I think this is a very viable option, and there is one spot that I'm just dying to see this roller coaster, and that is in Forbidden Valley. Now, like I said, these roller coasters can be extremely pretty off-ride because you're seeing these coasters kind of interacting with each other almost, you know, on two separate tracks. It's a really kind of visual spectacle, and I think the area with the most visual spectacle at the moment is Forbidden Valley. You know, we got the gorgeous retrack and retheme of Nemesis. We've recently got the Toxicator, which looks absolutely gorgeous off-ride. We've got Galactica as well, but I did talk about what they could potentially do with that in my last video, if you guys want to check that out. And I do think there's plenty of room for it down in Forbidden Valley. Now, of course, there is the very hot topic of talking about Galactica and whether or not that's going to get removed for a new coaster. I personally don't think so. I don't think they would get rid of it, but if they did, again, that is a very viable space, considering, you know, traditionally dueling coasters don't need a massive footprint. They're very kind of compact and windy around each other. You know, alternatively, if they don't want to get rid of Galactica, I do think there is space towards the back of Forbidden Valley just before you walk through the entrance to the area, whether there's that kind of space off to the left or a bit further back near the kind of little lake bit. Again, depending on how easy that is to get planning permission. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know much about how difficult that would be for them to make it happen. And there's plenty of space, especially with the blade being removed potentially. You know, that whole footpath up there that leads to the Sky Ride and the gardens, I think that could easily be turned into something if they kind of play their cards right. And I think a dueling coaster would look incredible in Forbidden Valley. Okay then, so that was kind of a very brief kind of rundown of why I think these coasters would be very strong at Alton Towers. Of course, these are just my opinions, you know, these are the ones specifically I want to see. I would love to hear what you guys would love to see down in the comments below as well. What kind of roller coaster type would you most want at Alton Towers? What do you think is the most realistic? Because not everything I've mentioned today probably is that realistic. You know, I don't know much about what goes on behind the scenes at Alton Towers, but I'm sure there's many factors that kind of deduce whether a coaster is viable to be built or not, or whether the planning stages, you know, is likely to be granted. So yeah, there's a lot of complications and not all of them are going to be realistic, but those are the three that I would most like to see. And yeah, I'm sure a lot of you guys also have some similar opinions on different roller coaster types, so definitely let me know down in the comments below. So then, I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did go on to enjoy it, make sure to like and subscribe. I'm very thankful for everyone who subscribed over the last kind of year or so. I've just recently hit 300 subs, and I literally couldn't have asked for a better group of people to be following my videos. I've been having so many lovely messages on Instagram. You guys have been commenting on my videos, and I've had some lovely conversations with people, especially with my Fright Nights updates. So I'm very thankful to everyone who's kind of joined the club, so to speak. So yeah, if it does seem like a bit of you and you love talking theme parks, then definitely come and join us. So without further ado, I'm going to let you guys get on with the rest of your day, and I will see you guys in the next video. See ya.